Greetings, everyone. We are thrilled that you took time out of your day to join us here for a conversation around mapping maritime prosperity zones. And if this is your first introduction to the American Maritime Industrial Coalition, you'll learn more about the organization as we go through this call. And so we certainly appreciate you being a part of this. So today we are going to have a fantastic panel. You are going to hear from Rear Admiral James Watson, from Commissioner Ryan Calkins from the Port of Seattle, from Gary Leaf Calhagen, the Director of the Texas Department of Transportation's Maritime Division, and most certainly, last but not least, Dr. Beatrice Canamary with the Shore Strategy Group. I'm going to be your moderator. I am Darren Shelton, Vice President at Moran Shipping Agencies. And so we are, as I said, going to be looking at the Maritime Prosperity Zones, a part of the MAP program. And I'm going to let retired U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral Jim Watson take it from here to give us a little bit more insight and context around the policy. Admiral?
Sure. Thank you very much, Darren. I'm really excited to have our two guests, and they're going to hopefully tell us about some actual maritime prosperity zones. But let me just give you a little bit of the context. The Ships for America Act, which I guess was the initial proposal from congressional members, actually touched on how we're going to create this new maritime industrial base for our country. Consequently, there's been a maritime action plan that came out from the administration that includes 4 pillars. And the very first pillar, which is entitled Rebuild U.S. Shipbuilding Capacity and Capabilities, includes some details on maritime prosperity zones. The recommendation in the Maritime Action Plan is to have maritime prosperity zones designated where you need maritime supply chain entities, workforce development and educational institutions, and advanced manufacturing initiatives. So these are modeled after opportunity zones that this administration did, the first Trump administration, that were installed in various places where there was a desire for more economic development. Now there's a different bent here, because this proposal is really focused on revitalizing the maritime industrial base and revitalizing maritime related communities. So, what we would hope to see coming very soon is actual legislation in this Congress that would actually implement these maritime prosperity zones with the associated funding. And a large part of this has to do with tax benefits and incentives that would be provided to these communities. And there could be up to 100 of these maritime prosperity zones, according to the proposal that's on the table right now. So that's just the background. What we want to do today is to learn more about what the potential of these are in these 2 locations where our other guests are from, and to ask a few questions about that.
Thank you for that, Jim. And with that in mind, we are going to allow Ryan and Gear to take a minute and introduce themselves, as they can tell their story much better than I could, and maybe kind of give a little bit of vision from where they are seeing maritime prosperity zones geographically, regionally, from both the Pacific Northwest and the U.S. Gulf. And Ryan, how about we start with you? Thanks again for being here. If you would talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing up there and give us a little introduction for the audience.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Darren. Good afternoon, everyone. I am commissioner at the Port of Seattle. We are an omniport. We've got cargo operations, cruise operations, fishing terminal, recreational boating marina, and we have a long history in the shipbuilding industry as both landlord and in creating the kind of ecosystem around maritime. So providing space for light industrial, chandleries, others that support shipbuilding. We are absolutely supportive of this initiative by the federal government to really lean into restoring American maritime dominance. And with that said, we think the Pacific Northwest ecosystem for shipbuilding is somewhat unique. We'll be the first to admit we're in a relatively high cost area of the country, both in terms of real estate and labor. And so we recognize that we can't be all things to all people, but we see opportunities for expanding and really supporting the national interest in particular areas. That's one thing I really want to convey is that I don't think any of us should approach this in a sort of scarcity mindset that if one area wins a maritime prosperity zone, that limits the opportunities for other areas to do the same. I actually think there is ample resources from the initiatives that we're hearing in the federal government to support many of these. And that really what we should be thinking about right now is how does each area lean into its unique attributes to support in ways that make the most sense. From the standpoint of the Port of Seattle, from the Pacific Northwest, the efforts right now, there's kind of a three-legged stool. There's a group of ports organizing right now to ensure that questions around real estate, permitting, government action are coordinated at the local and state level. We're blessed in Washington State to have 75 public ports. Not all of them are capable of hosting a shipyard, but many of them are. And so we're working together to understand what's available right now that aligns with shipyard needs for potential expansion. So there's that initiative. The second initiative is led by a group of shipyards themselves. So kind of what I would say the tip of the spear in a lot of this is at least 10 of roughly 16 or so shipyards that are interested in this space are participating in this work group to develop a kind of common message for what a maritime prosperity zone in the Pacific Northwest would look like, or multiple, if that makes sense. And then the final piece is the expansion of workforce development to support shipyard capacity expansion in the Pacific Northwest. And I think probably everybody on this call will agree that is one of the principal bottlenecks for increased shipbuilding in the United States is we need to be able to train the welders, machinists, sheet metal workers, the naval architecture firms, the marine engineers to be able to do this work. We need to broaden the base of workforce and ensure that they remain in maritime. One thing over a course of we wrote a paper on this called the Challenges and Opportunities of Shipbuilding in the Pacific Northwest. Workforce development was the one thread that ran through all of this, and an area that we found really problematic for most shipyards is that because of the kind of feast and famine nature of shipbuilding, many of the workers would flee to safer harbors. Let's say they would go to commercial construction or oil and gas as soon as an opportunity arose. So we need to figure out how to make that career in maritime welding or machining a sustainable career for those families. So I'll pause there.
Excellent and well done on the pun for fleeing the safer harbors. It's understandable. We see that.
Anytime I can throw in a maritime pun, I love to.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So, Gear, we will, hand it over to you to give us perspective you're seeing from the U.S. Gulf and Of course, I think you have a unique perspective, especially in this particular call, since you spent quite a bit of time in the Pacific Northwest as well. So you've got a pretty good national perspective in addition to what you're seeing in Texas. So, Gear, please.
Yeah, so Garrett Calhagen, I'm the director at TxDOT for the Maritime Division, and basically we're tasked with a few things. We oversee the state's investments in maritime and ports, and right now we're probably looking at around $800 million worth of active projects going on. And we're also responsible to create for the legislature every biennium when they meet a needs assessment for the state of Texas and identify needs and opportunities as well. And obviously, the shipbuilding has been, tip of the spear for us. And I'm going to get my pun in right away. A rising tide lifts all boats. We're seeing this as a collaborative efforts, kind of to echo what Commissioner Ryan said. I mean, there shouldn't be a zero-sum opportunity. So we've had some areas that we're looking at. Pelican Island is one of the ones that's probably gotten a little bit more attention than most lately with the Davies contract and the icebreakers. But we're also looking at the Corpus Christi area and the Brownsville, where there is active shipbuilding in relatively large size vessels. As we started digging into it, I kind of found it interesting that, the shipbuilding employment numbers, Virginia, Mississippi, and Florida kind of lead. I think there's about 30,000 active jobs in Virginia, 12,500 in Mississippi, and 14,500 in Florida. Louisiana, Washington, and Texas are all within about 500 people of employed in the shipbuilding side of things right now. So what we're trying to do is to reach out to industry, and we're trying to identify, workforce development is going to be key to a lot of this. We're also very fortunate to have a lot of oil and gas, industrial base down here. So we feel that there is a pipeline that we can utilize to provide labor for these shipbuilding initiatives. And again, we're working collaboratively with each of the ports individually, with the private sector, and obviously educating as best as we can the elected officials that are ultimately going to decide within the state of Texas anyway, how to continue to fund these things. Now, these maritime prosperity zones, I mean, they're very interesting, and as they're defined, they're wonderful, but they've yet to come into existence. So we're still being a little bit fluid in how we're going to interpret them. But what we see is that that shipbuilding, if we're going to follow the lead of, say, Finland or South Korea, which it appears is who we're reaching out to right now, to they're sort of the preeminent folks in that area. A lot of this stuff is going to be modular, or we see it as potentially being modular, and that would create opportunities that are not just coastal and maybe not even just along the riverways. I was having this conversation. I think we can kind of reverse engineer the success that Boeing has had, in Washington. They bring parts and pieces from all over the globe, but they're the ones that assemble the final aircraft. And also we look at the wind energy sector and how they've been able to sort of globally source large components and bring them to one place to assemble them. So that's what we're kind of focusing on. And we're very excited. We feel that it's a robust environment to get involved in, and as it develops further and we get a little bit more clarity on how these things are actually going to be developed, we stand at the ready, tip of the spear as well, to take action as soon as possible. So that's in a nutshell.
Very good. We've got some questions here, and I'm going to bring Rear Admiral Watson back into the conversation, but I'm going to throw this out there, and then Jim, I know you've had a lot of conversations at a congressional level and spoken to quite a few of the potential maritime prosperity zone leaders, the stakeholders in the various groups. But we'll go back to you, Ryan, with this question at first. You kind of touched on this, and maybe you can just unpack it a little bit more. In your region, in terms of organizing around, however official it may look today, a maritime prosperity zone, who is leading it? How mature is that effort? And then, Gear, after Ryan's had a chance to talk about that, you can chime in, and of course, Admiral, you as well.
Well, I would, on that, I would say the principal group focused on this is a coalition of shipyards. And they really ought to be at the forefront of this because they're the ones who understand the technological needs. You know, as we think about modernizing shipyard capacity with the introduction of state-of-the-art technology, these are all big investments. And you know, to Gear's point, if we want to do what the Finns and Koreans are doing, they rely on enormous national subsidies essentially to be able to capitalize these assets. And I think that is, you know, part of what it's going to take. And that might also be supported through a two things that we heard a lot from shipyards, which is they benefit when there's standardization of ship types or vessel types. And they also benefit when they have longer orders of business, you know, longer books of business that they can count on so that they can amortize these significant capital costs over longer periods of time. That is, I think, a place where something like, you know, the federal government can step up and support that. And so, yeah, I think that the shipyards are really in the lead on that. The other two legs of that stool, I think, are places, you know, I mentioned you need space to do this stuff. And waterfront property in Washington State is very expensive and limited. You know, we have a lot of rough coast, the areas where we have deep water with favorable shoreline. Most of that is already developed in some way. And so we're identifying, are there brownfield sites? Are there underutilized port facilities where we can expand? So in that sense, that in ports are public agencies, so they have a mission to do a lot of this work already. You know, they're taking on that. And then on the workforce development side, that is a mixed bag. It's hard. You know, we're talking about we really need to start in K-12 education, getting kids exposed to these opportunities. I really sell it on, you know, these are not jobs that are as susceptible to AI and automation as a lot of the professional services jobs that maybe you're being told are the best careers right now. You know, I've got 3 kids in K-12 education right now, and I got one of my sons is going to do a job at a shipyard this summer because I want him exposed to that kind of hands-on work. But I think we need superintendents of K-12 education aware of what's going on here. We need community college and vocational VOTech schools leaning into this. And, you know, we're really building on the premise that it's easier to expand an existing facility than to try to start one from scratch. So we're working with the programs that already do a lot of this work. And I think at the state level, this is where state governments need to step up too. And, you know, so obviously Texas is taking some leadership here. We're asking our legislature and governor to lean into this too, particularly on the workforce development side.
Okay, and I can.
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying, you know, we are fortunate down here on the Gulf Coast. We have a little bit more access to readily available land. So, but as far as who's taking the lead on this, I think that we are, as I stated earlier, we're identifying the opportunities, we're identifying the needs, and then we're working collaboratively with the, you know, the shipbuilding industry, also private sector, you know, because there's also going to be funding issues that come about, you know. You say you want to build a ship. Well, before you can build a ship, you need to build a shipyard. You know, to the commissioner's point, it's probably easier to build upon what you have, but we also have the opportunity to build it new. Again, with our workforce development, I think that is critical. We're also having conversations about, you know, getting into almost like the middle school level and at least exposing folks. You know, they can become enamored with a picture of a really cool ship or a crane or, you know, a floating dry dock, and you know that plants the seed. We're hoping as the legislature meets, you know, in this next upcoming session that the information that we bring to them will sort of rally the troops, so to speak, to see the importance of this. Because one of the things we've seen is that there's a tremendous return on investment, and you know, I think this all circles back to 0.04, right? We just need strategically from a national perspective, we need to acknowledge that what is happening now is just unacceptable, and we need to find a route. So it's building the coalitions. We've been reaching out to our fellow states down here in the Gulf, but I also see an importance to reaching out to West Coast ports and taking advantage of what they bring to the table. And I would also argue that we should be looking at the middle of the country as well. And if there's components that can be built in the middle of the country and facilitated to the final sort of construction of the vessels, we should take that into coordination as well. But it's a coalition of the willing right now, and since it's still a very fluid time, we're casting a wide net to see whoever we can capture that we can bring under the umbrella.
Admiral, anything to add on that from your conversations?
Yeah, I guess I'm the guy sitting here that's closest to Washington, D.C., and I wanted to focus a little bit on, I was just at the hearing yesterday about this, marine industrial base. It was a combination of the people talking about naval shipbuilding and commercial shipbuilding. But I realize that you all are ahead here in light of the fact that there is no legislation. These things are in a plan, and a plan is just a plan until it starts to actually get executed. But the advantage there is that there's still some wiggle room in what the ultimate federal policy and legislation will be. So I wanted to sort of ask a couple of questions about that, because I do talk to these folks. I've been paying very close attention to anything related to maritime prosperity zones. So I guess one of the questions I'd like to ask is, I love your comment, Commissioner Calkins, about the fact that these should not be competing with each other. Is 100 too many? And then there's also been some questions raised about the time frame that the legislation would put onto the designation of a maritime prosperity zone. Right now, the proposal says 10 years. And is that a long enough time to make the significant investments that might be needed to really make a big difference? So if I could just ask both guys there about those things, and I will definitely take notes, and whatever you suggest, I can find out if there's room for movement on there.
Boy, that's the question on the number of maritime prosperity zones. I guess we're still waiting to see how they're going to be defined, and I think in Washington, what we've been focusing on, and let me say, we're really trying to think Washington and Oregon, because a big part of our maritime industrial base here is along the Columbia River, not just the Puget Sound, where we have great partnerships with yards in Oregon and component manufacturers that could be supporting ship construction. You might start something in Vancouver, Washington, it gets towed across to Portland for finals. I mean, there's lots of opportunity there. So we're trying to think really Pacific Northwest, but I wholeheartedly agree with the idea that a lot of this work could happen in areas not traditionally thought of as shipbuilding areas. And in our case, in Eastern Washington, land is much more plentiful. We have fantastic barge delivery services that could bring very heavy components from an area where electricity might be cheaper, particularly as we're thinking about forging metal components. I love to cite what is probably an apocryphal fact, but that resonates with me, which is something like 85% of the value added in a ship happens not at the shipyard, but in the upstream supply chain leading to it. And so I think for lots of reasons, we want to spread the benefit of shipbuilding across multiple constituencies, and to do the development of this in areas where maybe there is a workforce that's relatively untapped at this point, and we could reach into, or there's energy or metal production that could be tapped into in places like the Upper Columbia for us and the Mississippi for others. So yeah, I like the idea of not making this just a coastal economy, but really reaching into the inland parts of the country too.
Good stuff. Gary, you got anything you want to add to that before we move on?
Just a little bit. I mean, when you say is 100 too much or too few, I mean, I guess it depends like how large are these zones? I mean, if you're going to have every little town that contributes be its own prosperity zone, then maybe 100 isn't enough. But if you're looking at like regionally, um, I guess I could make an argument that Texas could have 10 of them, but I could also equally make an argument that the Gulf Coast could be an opportunity zone. So until it gets fleshed out a little bit more. But I agree with the commissioner that, I mean, we're gonna utilize assets wherever we have, and we're gonna try to create the best possible, lowest possible cost supply chain for these. So we'll just see how it fleshes out.
That's great. Thank you. And I'll try to keep in touch with you all as I find out more about where this might be going.
Good. So I'm going to pause here for just a second and let our audience know we will be taking time at the end of the call for questions. So if you've got some of these and you want to put them into the chat, we will do our best to answer as many of those as possible. I now want to ask a question around, if you will, dependency on the federal government and barriers. And Gary, we'll start with you on this one. What are you seeing in your region that you need from DC that can't be generated locally? And if you will, how specific is your ask at this point? And then when he gets done, Ryan will let you answer that same question.
Yeah, so I would say there are a few. Most of our asks are going to circle around the Army Corps and really the ability to maximize the efficiencies of the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway. Also, Pelican Island was brought up. We've got the land base out there, but there's a federally navigable ship channel that goes under a bridge at the present time, and there's conversations about maybe making that a land bridge. So we need to be able to understand what the timeline is for decision making. We also need to be able to have the ability, if for whatever reason there are federal projects that can't be funded or there's no appetite for, and the state decides that perhaps they want to step in and fill that void, we need to understand, how we can do that without creating an entirely new level of bureaucracy around that. One of the things that we look at is the replacement of like the Brazos River floodgate, which is constantly, having elisions happen there all the time, and there's no funding from the Corps. Well, we could potentially come up with the funding, but then all of a sudden we've got to start an entirely new NEPA process, even if we're going to do the exact same project and hire the exact same folks to do the project. So literally a carbon copy, but there's this entire new level of bureaucracy. So I think if we're going to develop these opportunities in a timely manner, we need to have an honest conversation about how do we help the federal government in their responsibilities, and how do we bring resources to the table that we can utilize without creating this entire new circus of hoops to jump through to do that. I know that the administration has spoken that they have a strong desire to limit some of this bureaucracy. And again, I want to make it crystal clear, we're not looking to get away from any of the environmental responsibilities. We're just looking at the bureaucracy and the process that runs alongside of it. So as far as the federal government goes, that would be the one thing that I would like to see addressed.
Very good. Very good. We are going to now, we've got plenty of questions. So we're going to hop to the next piece of this conversation. And I want to turn our attention over to Dr. Canterbury. She has some questions. We're going to talk around our coordination and national picture. I'll get this going and then I'll let her kind of pick up. But kind of following up on what you just said, your regions have got to compete for the same pool of federal dollars. And, one of the questions is going to be where we see opportunity to complement rather than to duplicate what other regions might be doing. And I think that this particular conversation is a good example of how there can be collaboration from the U.S. Gulf to the Pacific Northwest. But maybe Ryan will let you take a stab at that question first. How do you see this more collaboration than competition mindset working? And are you already in contact with some other regions in that particular regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, but we recognize that we're not going to be particularly competitive when it comes to large steel hold vessels and that are very welding intensive. We in the Pacific Northwest do really well and are very competitive on smaller aluminum vessels, on um, obviously vessels related to fisheries. We have a pretty strong interest in being able to not only build those, but then also have the repair and maintenance facility. So, and that's another part of this that I want to make sure we're aware of. When you, if we are going to be successful, it's not just about building them, it's also about repair and maintenance. And so you want to be able to marry those two functions as closely as possible. So I think in terms of the regionalization, my interest would be from a federal level, I would want the, potential, those who hold the purse strings to think really conscientiously about which programs ought to go to which regions based on the particular attributes of those regions. In the Pacific Northwest, we recognize we are the gateway to the Arctic, and we're also the shortest steaming time to the Southwest Theater in the Pacific. Those are obviously vital national security interests. We think we should lean into shipbuilding capacities that support those two missions.
Good stuff. Gear?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go to my favorite word, and that's coopetition. I think we're going to have to compete where we have to compete, and we're going to have to find ways to cooperate. To the commissioner's point, yeah, they do a really high-tech aluminum welding up there. Well, who knows, like, what is the configuration of these vessels? Maybe the housing components are aluminum and the hulls are steel. I don't know yet, but at the end of the day, the market is also going to decide a lot of these things. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to maintain that open dialogue with the folks that are actually going to be building this, and then bring in our partners. And then I think we find things that we can all advocate for collectively that make sense. I think that it's kind of ironic, as you said, you're the gateway to the Arctic, and we're building icebreakers. We're going to be building icebreakers in Galveston. But we got this special Texas crushed ice. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. But anyway, I think it's just an opportunity to focus on what you can do and what you can do well, and then bring as many people to the table as possible, so we can sort of spread the wealth. And then also, that brings into that you're protecting the supply chains too. You're not having everything concentrated in one area. Obviously, each area has its own unique challenges, but just having that coopetition and getting folks together collaboratively to make the arguments for what is needed for this to be successful. And I think if you can get the state of Washington, the state of Texas, and the state of Maine to agree on things that benefit all of us, and we go collectively and make that argument at the federal level, people are going to be like, wow, this is pretty impressive. This usually doesn't happen. So that would be my 2 cents.
I love that idea.
Good 2 cents. Dr. Canterbury, love to get your thoughts.
Well, I was just going to ask them if they see that there is a opportunity to kind of copy the European model, where each country kind of creates an expertise in a specific type of shipbuilding capacity, like icebreakers or cruise ships or whatever, any type of different ships specific to each region, leveraging each region's expertise or innovation, supply chain contribution, or you see every region just doing what they can do, and then how they would exchange ideas, exchange knowledge, exchange experience with that. Because we are talking a lot here on the West Coast, we're talking a lot on the Gulf, but we see the Great Lakes also getting a lot of traction now. They are called the Fourth Coast now, right? And there is already a shipbuilding consortium that was created in the past, I'd say, in the past few months. The major shipbuilders also formed the Great Lakers the Great Lakes Shipyard Alliance to compete with the Coast Guard icebreaker contract. So we see these movements not only on the coast side, but internally too. So how do you see them? How do you see a way of leveraging expertise from each region and then they collaborating with each other in what there is something in common that they could collaborate?
I'll jump in on this one. I think absolutely. I think it was mentioned earlier that we also need to realize that in order to sustain this, we have to start talking about building classes of vessels where there's multiple orders of these vessels, because every time they, I'm responsible for the ferry system down here, and basically when we go out to procure a new ferry, they're like, hey, if you put in an order for 3 or 4, the first one's going to be 150% of the actual cost. The next one will be 100, and then we'll get down to 60, and then the fourth one will be 40. So I think it would be very, very beneficial if we could find different areas of the country that had expertise, and they could focus on a component or a part, and then they will get better and better at that, and the costs will be driven down, and it will be a net benefit to the entire system. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to reach out to all our cohorts across the country and really understand what they're going for. And again, there will be some competition. That's just going to happen. But, we need to have that cooperation as well. So it would be certainly something that I would strive to see is more of a regionalized, everybody brings to the table what they're best at, and then we collaborate to build the final product.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's totally agree. And I'm reminded of a presentation I saw recently from a major European shipbuilder that demonstrated the kind of trends that we've seen in global shipbuilding, where the Europeans have really specialized in vessels that are much more bespoke per vessel. So, cruise ships, research vessels, icebreakers, and the increasing sophistication of the electronics, the propulsion systems. We're moving to this world in which vessel types are getting incredibly complex. The metaphor the presenter used was, think of a ship like a smartphone that comes pre-installed with a few apps, but really you then, as a ship owner, are going to determine what are the other apps that you add on to that, in that sense, sort of whether it's propulsion systems or electronics or hoteling options that you want on your ship. And I think in the Pacific Northwest, because of our technology capabilities, we will be able to kind of be at the forefront of some of these, whether it's autonomous vessels or smart vessels, that we will be able to lean into that expertise as well. And we've got a really strong naval architecture cluster here too that can do some of that work. And maybe as those vessel types mature, then the mass production of them moves to other areas where labor and real estate costs aren't as significant. But I think that's an area where we can absolutely lean into it. And we've seen interest from a lot of the new defense contractors that are developing these systems for at least having an outpost in the Pacific Northwest where they can tap into some of that expertise.
Good. Well, we're making some headway, and I just want to reiterate, if any of the audience has any questions, you want to throw that into the chat, we will definitely try and get to those. I've got another question, and then we'll kind of do a quick go around the table. We're talking about assets that are in regions, whether it's shipyards, repair, of course, port infrastructure. Gary mentioned, land bridges, things like that can be very key. And then, of course, we know workforce is absolutely essential. I'm curious if there was a national platform that mapped everything, where you could see the region's capacities and what they were working on, so that no particular region was working blind, and you get the picture about the picture. How useful do you think that could be at a national level? And Gary, we'll start with you.
In theory, incredibly useful. In practice, I'm not quite so sure. I think that's where you're going to have the competition componentry of this. I don't think anybody wants to show all their cards if they're trying to develop something on their own. But, in theory, I think that would be a great idea. So you can kind of look at it holistically, and then you can connect dots as to where maybe final assembly would make more sense, depending on where componentries are manufactured. It's one of those things where, it'd be interesting to see in practice.
Good, Brian?
Well, a few weeks ago, I recall we got I think it was Marad that publishes the survey on current U.S. shipyard capacity. I think that's a great start. But I love the idea of drilling down deeper into exactly what capabilities each of these yards have, and also to think about one of the things that we've looked a lot at is shipyard energy audits. Could we conduct an energy audit to determine, is there sufficient grid capacity to support expansion of this yard? What would you need to do to bring additional capacity to be able to power a dry dock and all the equipment, plasma cutters, the advanced manufacturing equipment that would be necessary to really bring us up to the state of the art that we see in places like Korea. That is a very hard bottleneck to address if we don't even know what the issue is. And when we surveyed Washington shipyards, we heard pretty consistently that they're either having to bring on temporary generators or wait in long queues to get utility power in order to do their expansion. And so that's just one of a number of these elements. But yeah, it would be fantastic to have that kind of inventory of capabilities.
Well, when we talk about looking at a heat map almost as it was and inventorying capabilities, one of the things we're seeing in addition to just regional growth and innovation is groups that are getting involved in some of this conversation. Clearly, AMIC, a big piece of that, we'd like to think. Looking at the chat, Bob mentioned a group called We Work the Waterways. It's focused on career maritime interest. Dr. Canterbury, you've been involved with AMIC since we got this thing going, and you've got a pretty good idea of some of what's happening out there. Wonder if you want to maybe give a quick iteration, as it were, of what we're doing with AMIC to the audience, those who might not be completely familiar. And you've got a pretty good handle on that, so I'll go to you.
Yeah, sure. So we built AMIC in December, and our idea was exactly to build the execution layer of this whole conversation, because the government, the map establishes the rules, establishes the plan, but it's very hard to coordinate that across the private sector. And our intention is to give support to the government, to support the White House, to Merit, on how to build this execution layer on the private sector, on the private layer, because it's very hard for them to map all this, and we bring this conversation to them. So, for instance, we have an event coming up in May the 20th in Washington, D.C., where we're going to bring a lot about the discussion, especially the maritime prosperity zones. We were going to bring what we are seeing now, what is being built, and what the industry needs in terms of support from the federal government. So our major role is to be an execution layer and to help accelerate the execution of the map. So, Darren, if you want to close.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think that we're going to give a chance for our speakers to have some parting comments. But, this landscape of groups, I know there are groups that are working on advocacy, trying to help get the Ships for America's Act pushed through. We've got organizations like NMEPA, which is near to a lot of what we're doing, that is working on workforce, even going all the way down into grade school level to try and encourage the future of the maritime workforce. So a lot of very exciting things. And, Gear's term, co-opetition, we've got to have individuals who are thinking about the big picture and trying to make sure that this is a win-win, not just in any one given port, but in regions and maritime prosperity zones, because obviously this matters at the highest level, at the national level. Rear Admiral Jim Watson and Carney Line Walker, along with a few others, wrote a book, 0.4. If the audience is not aware with it, I highly recommend checking that out. This is a national concern, and I guess since I'm talking about it, Admiral, it would only be right if I pass the mic back over to you for a minute to talk about how you see this and maybe some of your parting comments on this particular conversation, sir.
Yeah, I also want to maybe answer some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat, and I thought somebody was raising their hand as well. The one I'm looking at is how can people get involved with this making of the map a reality? And if you go to the AMIC website, it's a coalition, so that's what it's all about. Is hit the button that says join the coalition, and we don't want to do this by ourselves. We want your help, and we're going to have more events and both live events in person as well as webinars like this. And then Pete Gautier, my good friend, Vice Admiral Gautier, asked, what's the difference between maritime prosperity zones and the existing federal opportunity zones? And we identified some of those differences when I was discussing it. The opportunity zones are mainly focused on geographic areas that are disadvantaged in terms of economic opportunity. The incentives are for startups, small businesses, and there's federal money going to it. I think the structure probably for distributing funding through states and so on down to those areas may be similar for the maritime prosperity zones, but maritime prosperity zones are not going to be limited to startups and small businesses. It's going to be focused on, we've talked about it today, on the strengths of the different parts of the country, and what they want to do and how they all fit together to create ultimately an industrial base that meets the needs of the country, both for economic and national security. And I think that these two parts of the country are going to be perfect for that. We heard about the Great Lakes area. I don't know, and I'm going to probably be talking a lot about, well, is a entire state, like Gare was talking about, what you would want for a maritime prosperity zone to achieve the goal, or would you want 10 of them in the state of Texas, for example? I haven't, got my arms around what would be the best, but that's why we have these discussions. That's what we want to bring to the table for some of our leadership roundtables. So I'll stop there.
Well, that's good. I think we've got another slide here that really kind of puts a pin in what we've been discussing here today, and that is how this is a national conversation where, whether we're talking about Texas or the Pacific Northwest or anything in between, Great Lakes, Illinois, there's a lot of exciting things going on, and our world needs a very strong American maritime. And so this is not just a United States issue, it really is a global issue. And so I think the conversations that are happening, this being one of them, are critically important to where we're going to be, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. So before we wind up here, I'd like to give our guest another opportunity to maybe add any parting comments. Gare, Ryan, anything?
What comes to mind for me is sort of three things that I think we should keep in mind as we're advocating at the national level for this Maritime Action Plan. Is first, we need to make sure that there is a sustained funding source for this effort. The maritime, the fund that's being contemplated needs to have a consistent source of revenue that it can draw down for these initiatives as they come along. The second is we need to approach the restoration of American shipbuilding from a perspective of humility, that we have a lot to learn from our allies. And so I'm quite encouraged by these efforts to bring in the Koreans and the Finns and others, and to tap into the expertise that and quite honestly, the shipbuilding techniques that they've instituted to be as efficient as they are. And then the final thing I'd say is we should really keep in mind that one of the best ways that we can advance this is to first do no harm. And so when we think about tariff policy and other federal regulations, that actively inhibit our ability to expand these industries. And I think particularly of steel tariffs, we need to really understand how that's impacting a shipbuilder's capacity to compete, not just domestically, but globally. And, that would be effectively a way that we could, at the stroke of a pen, increase our capacity for competition.
Well said. Well said. Gear?
Yeah, I'll echo what Ryan said, but I also want to kind of bring home a point, and that is, you keep saying like, how do we collaborate? The state of Texas and the Pacific Northwest are two very unique geographical areas of the United States, but we have a lot more in common than what most people would think, and we're already finding ways to collaborate, in the maritime sector. So it's not something new. It's just now we create a focus around this, and I would also reiterate the need for consistent funding and an understanding of how that is going to be deployed. One of the examples from the past is the harbor maintenance tax and some of the challenges. Hopefully, we can learn from some of the challenges that we had with that. When we do find a funding mechanism that we take into consideration, it's not just getting the money, but it's deploying it in regular intervals, so it can be incorporated into the business plans and the mindsets of the people that are going to be investing from the private sector, because it's going to take a huge investment from the private sector as well. The government's not going to be able to fix everything, but they can certainly be a catalyst.
Absolutely. And that's what we need. We need some catalyst at this stage. We need these kind of conversations to be happening in webinars, at events, just about anywhere there needs to be this encouragement for, a real transformation of what we have on the American maritime scene. So to that end, I would mention a couple things before we leave here today, that there is some upcoming events. National Maritime Week, May 18th through the 22nd. Is going to be happening in Washington, D.C. Some of the audience may have been to that before, and I highly encourage you to attend. You can find more information about that on the Shipping Insight website, the NMEPA.net website. Both of them have got some information. And the Shipping Insight in particular will have another conference in October of 26. Later this year, this fall, back in Houston. Just find that on the Shipping Insight website, put that on your calendar. We would love to see you in Houston to continue that conversation. What you'll find when you look at the National Maritime Week information, you'll see a list of the agenda, some of the speakers, some of the topics that are being covered. This is also in our chat for those of you that are looking there. And then this particular conversation is been recorded. It will be shared on the maritimecoalition.us, which is the AMIC website. You can get more involved there. You can sign up to get more information. As it's already been mentioned, this is a group of like-minded stakeholders and participants who want to see this conversation move forward. We hope you'll be a part of that. We hope you will encourage others. We cannot do this alone. This only works if we do it together. To our guest, to our speakers today, thank you so much for taking time to be a part of this. We appreciate your efforts. We applaud what you're doing. And last but not least, to the AMIC co-founders, of which Rear Admiral Jim Watson, Dr. Canterbury, Carlene Leiden-Walker, Jonathan Chia, Sal, myself. We appreciate all of you for everything you're doing. Rachel, thanks for your help putting all this together today. And with that, we're going to give you back an extra couple minutes. We appreciate all of you. Have a wonderful afternoon. We look forward to seeing you somewhere soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.